Hello, everybody. Hello to the LinkedIn community. Welcome to this special live session introducing the platform University, an initiative by RMIT Forward and Boundaryless. I'm Shruti Prakash, your host for today's session, and I'm thrilled to welcome our speakers. We have Pete Cohen, Development Partner at RMIT University, Peter Thomas, Director at RMIT Forward, and Simone, who's the founder of Boundaryless. They've all been the visionaries and the driving forces behind the Platform University white paper, and I'm super excited to have all of you here. The Platform University white paper presents a transformative agenda for universities, and it's created to address the urgent need for change in higher education. As universities face increasing complexity and market demands, this initiative proposes that they adapt platform organization models and the entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organization framework. This approach will empower universities to become agile, build entrepreneurial hubs, foster a dynamic culture that makes them essentially resilient and market ready institutions. This collaboration is led between two different and divergent organizations. One is RMIT Forward, RMIT University Center for Future Skills and Workforce Transformation. It brings together a global ecosystem of industry fellows to build innovative learning systems, advanced applied research, and drive workforce development. Boundaryless, on the other hand, is a platform design and entrepreneurial organization development agency. We provide open source framework and support a global community through workshops, trainings, and consulting services. On our very first session today, we'll dive into the white paper and explore the core challenges in higher education as we know it today and discuss how the platform organization models and ecosystem enabling practices can equip universities to build resilient structures. So, without any further ado, let's jump right in. On to you, Peter, for introducing us to the white paper itself.
Great. Thank you, Shruti. My name's Peter Thomas, and I'm Director of RMIT Forward, which is the Centre for Future Skills and Workforce Transformation at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. As Shruti said, I'm going to be speaking with Pete Cohen, who's one of my colleagues from the Centre, and Simone Cicero, who's CEO of Boundaryless. I'm going to set the context for why we did this and some of the ideas behind it. And I'm going to hand over to Simone to talk a little bit about platform organizations, which of course is Boundaryless's specialism. And then I'll hand over to Pete to talk a bit about how we make these things work. What would a platform university look like and how can some of these concepts be applied? And I'll finish off and just sum up the conversation and then direct you to some resources that you can use to learn a bit more about the Platform University initiative. And we'll speak for around 45 minutes or so. And if you have questions, of course, you can post them and we'll try and answer them either now or after the webinar is finished. And the recording of the webinar will be posted so you can access it after the event. So what's the Platform University? It seems like an unusual kind of combination of things to take one of the oldest types of institution in the world. Universities are 1,000 years old or so, and combine it with some of the latest cutting edge thinking in the ways that we design and operate organizations. One of the reasons we think those two things come together is one of our roles at Forward, at RMIT University, is to do some of the forward-looking thinking, it's in the name, about all things skills and workforces. So our center looks at not just the skills needed in the next 1 or 2 years, but what might be needed in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time, and also about some of the organizational structures that are needed to support and develop people's skills. So whilst, of course, the ideas from platform organizations are being applied in many industries, and Simone will talk about that, and I'll talk about some examples at the end, we thought it would be an interesting thing to do to start with types of organization that have remained the same for a very long time. So there's no criticism implied in that. It's merely an observation that there are types of organizations like universities that have remained essentially the same for a very long time. And there are good reasons for that. Of course, it provides an incredible amount of stability. So, you know that When you go to university, wherever you are in the world, they've all got different specialisms and different skills and different kinds of expertise and scientific specialisms. You largely know that the organization will function as it's meant to function. You'll attend courses, you'll do research, researchers will engage in research projects. But what we've observed in the environment, certainly in the last few years, it's been coming a while, is there's an incredibly amount of instability in many industries, but particularly education. And some of those things you can read about in detail in the white paper. And some of those things are geopolitical pressures. So we're seeing in almost every country, certainly in Australia, certainly in the UK and in the US, geopolitical pressures, including relationships between different countries, students moving between countries, the recent migration caps that have been implemented in many countries, including Australia, have started to make it more difficult to do the things you did before. So a decrease in the amount of students, for example, coming to university has a heavy impact on the university's finances. But there are other kinds of instability too. So take the rollout of technology. And of course, the technology that everybody's interested in is generative AI. And that's having a huge impact on the kind of things that people do in universities, whether that's people teaching courses, whether it's people doing research, or whether it's students themselves that are increasingly using generative AI to complete their assignments. And almost every institution, every educational institution is trying to face up to those pressures and more. And so there are lots of people who say that universities are at a turning point. It's now time to try and change. I'm going to share my screen, which has some speaking notes we can take a look at. So, as a summary, new global financial pressures, increased competition. Of course, there are many more entrants to the education market now. So not only are universities competing with other universities, but they're competing with private sector providers who have increasingly entered the sector to provide learning experiences for students, whoever they might be. There's new types of technological change we've talked about, but also new student expectations that actually we've now realized that learning is a lifelong endeavor. It's not something you do between the ages of 19 and 23. There are new kinds of learning that people want to access, and universities are, of course, responding to those changes. But one argument is we might need to respond a little faster than we're doing. And so the idea of developing micro-credentials, which is now is a common term that's used across the education sector, implies that it won't be degrees necessarily that are the currency of education institutions, but it might be shorter form pieces of learning that can be used to develop different kinds of skills. That's what I mean about looking forward to the types of skills that people need to acquire. And then finally, of course, funding instability. There are a whole range of funding pressures on universities. And one of them is, of course, increasingly to find private sector clients that consume the products and services of universities, from applied research to consulting to other forms of product that the university creates. And the key quote, which you'll see in the white paper, is universities are at a pivotal moment. They must decide whether to transform or risk irrelevance in a rapidly changing landscape. Of course, there are many views on this. And so in some views, universities are doing exactly what they're meant to do: deliver economic value, to create life-changing experiences for students, to generate new research ideas. But on the other side, there are people who look at that and say, well, there is a need to change faster, to do different kinds of things. So our inspiration for the platform university came from the idea of what would happen if we brought together some of the leading edge thinking in what organizations will look like in the future, with some organizations that have been around a long time. And the white paper explores in detail, and you'll hear from Simone and Pete in a minute, but explores in detail some of the ramifications of what might happen if you do that. And in the white paper, we explore in detail some potential benefits and opportunities. We look at some of the inhibitors and constraints, which are many, and we acknowledge that. This is meant to be something that stimulates thinking and provides new avenues for change, rather than saying that things are broken. That, in fact, is not the case. And in the white paper, we also provide a fictional, and I have to remind readers that it is a fictional story of what that might look like from the future perspective, maybe 10 years in the future, if someone were to try and implement these these concepts, ideas from the platform organization into a university context. And then finally, in the white paper, we wrap up, and Pete will talk about it in a little while, talking about how would you get started. One of the common reactions we've had when we've discussed this is, well, how would you get started? And we think there are several solutions to that problem to try and realize some of the benefits of applying platform organization models to a university context. So our aim is, and the white paper in this discussion is, what would it mean to transform universities using platform organization models? Well, one of the things it does is to empower administrative units to act autonomously, which is a very alien idea to many organizations, including universities, the idea that you might want to change some of the structures in quite radical ways. We think, though, considering some of the ideas, encourages partnerships and different kinds of partnerships. It changes the pace of innovation to speed up how change happens and increases opportunities for collaboration. And as Simone will talk about in a minute, the essence of platform organizations is flexible structures that can rapidly respond to new opportunities and challenges. And we'll talk about some examples at the end of this discussion. And it also implies that you create ecosystems and collaborations in those ecosystems that allow you to pool resources and drive shared value. So, enabling continuous innovation, being agile, responsive to market shifts, and especially integrating internal and external resources are all outcomes of applying platform organization thinking to the university structure. Simone, if you'd like to talk a bit about platform organization models for those colleagues who may not be as familiar as we are.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter. I also have picked up some illustrations that maybe I can use very quickly to guide our audience through some of the key elements. So if you can maybe disconnect your sharing, I can maybe share some pictures. Again, it's not really a presentation I want to share, but just just a quick. Let me see if I can pick the right window. You should see my screen now. Yes. Can you confirm? Yes, it works.
Yes,
Okay,
we
cool.
can see your screen.
So yeah, thank you so much. So I picked some illustrations from some of our articles that one can find on the Boundaryless blog. But essentially, just to introduce very quickly what a platform organization is, everybody's very familiar with the idea of a functional organization that is based on different, again, functions that exist inside an organization, where you have like departments or units that are focused on a particular capability that they can deliver to the rest of the organization. So you can have, for example, a function for HR, one for finance. Sometimes, you have a go-to-market function in the organization. You have sometimes business units, which are more special, contain the people that are more specialized in a certain part of the offering of the organization. And, we are used to that. This is probably the oldest form of organization that, we are used to, and everybody can be is familiar with the idea that whenever you have cross-functional projects happening in such an organization, it's very difficult sometimes, right? Because you have to coordinate resources and people that cross, through several silos in the organization. So that's why within time, people have started develop the approach called matrix organization. So, for example, you continue to have the functional silos, and the colors here show a little bit, what these silos are. But you kind of juxtapose more like a product or geography or project-oriented organization in the system, where essentially you expect people that work, for example, here in this space, between a silo and a project or a product, to respond, let's say, to two different leadership requests. So, for example, you have people that are from, finance that need to report to their finance, head of finance or manager. And on the other hand, they also need to report to maybe a product leader that coordinates resources across the board. And the matrix organization is not that it doesn't work, but it's really sometimes very hard to manage in existing organizations, because people always face these dual responsibility, and also still silos exist, and they're not necessarily related to a clear boundary, and so on. So essentially, the matrix organization has also has also shown some limitations over time, over the years, and that's why most of the pioneers in organizational thinking, the real pioneers in the world, are now switching towards what we call the platform organization, right? And again, this is a simplified illustration of what a platform organization is, but typically you can think of a platform organization as a system of units, typically much smaller than the units that you have in a matrix or functional organization. And they have typically, let's say, two macro types. Of course, there is more, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but essentially you can think of it as two macro types, where you have what we call micro enterprises that become the core element of the organization. So a micro enterprise, it's somehow a unit that can deliver a certain value proposition to the system. So it can be, for example, a user-facing micro enterprise, where you have a unit that manages its own P&L and brings certain services and products to the market, like a product unit would be in a traditional organization. And they normally rely on what we call shared service platforms. So they're not no more considered as functions in the organization, but they are rather units that create services that are normally used across the board, across the whole organization, by most of the product units. So, for example, you can imagine having a shared service platform that can give financial services, or another one that can give, I don't know, HR, or for example, sometimes also coordinated go-to-market services, or others. But it can be also structures that provide more typical services for the organization we are talking about. So essentially, again, it's a mix of two types of units. One unit is very much about delivering a consistent, normally user-facing value proposition, a product, a service, or something like that. And on the other hand, you have shared services that are used by the units. And essentially, with this approach, of course, you create the need for different artifacts in the organization. So, for example, when you have many units that bring different services and products to the market, you may want to have some sort of portfolio strategy. So as a company, if you embrace, as an organization, even a university, if you embrace, for example, this entrepreneurial structure, you may have to have some sort of overarching portfolio strategy that ensures that all the pieces that you bring into the market connect nicely. And for example, customers, like in the case of a university, can be an institution or a company that uses the platform university services. You can easily connect these services and products so that you can bundle, for example, a more complex set of services for a particular customer. So you want to have a portfolio strategy and also a taxonomy that is used essentially to explain the services both to the market but also to the teams. So a taxonomy and a portfolio are normally, again, a cohesive strategy for products, and on the other hand, a clear language that explains how these products connect. So, for example, you can have a product that is a general purpose solution, and then you can have specialized solutions on top or something like that. Essentially something that explains cohesively to the customers what you're bringing to the market, and also helps teams coordinate between each other. So that's essentially the basic structure of the platform organization. Of course, there are more specific constructs that are also important. And in our website, and we will share in a blog post following this webinar, we will share some links that people can look into. There are more specialized, let's say, structures in the organization. So, for example, if you look at how we at Boundaryless implement the platform organization model, we are very much inspired by our partnership with the Higher Group, which has developed a particularly advanced model for the platform organization, from which we mutuated the idea of micro enterprises and shared platforms, but also other constructs are used. So, for example, what we call the industry platforms are essentially akin to an internal venture firm that invests into new micro enterprises. And also there are several type of contracts that can be used to harmonize how these units get into the market. So, for example, you can have a multi-party contracts that multiple product and service units can sign between each other, so that they can bring to the market a more complex set of products as a bundle of what we call a user scenario. So, for example, again, if we can stay inside the platform university context, you could have, for example, a bundling of an advisory service with an actual, I don't know, data analytics, for example, or research service, and it can be bundled and brought to a customer, like for example, a research institution or a government that may need certain services like that. And so these are the type of contracts that, of course, when you have a multiple units inside an organization, you need to make it easy for them to collaborate and to bring cohesive solutions to the market. So basically, I don't want to go much longer than this, but essentially a platform organization, we need to understand that, again, a platform organization is something that moves from siloed functional capabilities into much more systemic, and much more autonomous structure, where you have micro-entrepreneurial teams and units that bring very clear value propositions to the market and collectively collaborate between each other, and shared services that they can consume from inside the organization. And another trait that maybe I didn't mention and is worth mentioning in the closure is this tendency that platform organizations have to cross boundaries. So, for example, you see this line that we pictured here. It's making it clear that sometimes, partnerships and service consumption can happen across the board. So you can have across the border. Sorry. So you can have, for example, a platform organization where you bring a solution to the market, enhanced by an external party partnership through these collective contracts that we use to, bundle services together and bring it to the market. So it's generally an organization that's much more keen to partnering across the organizational boundary. So that's it. And again, I will pass back the floor to my colleagues to explore what does it mean in the platform university context.
All right, great. Thank you. I mean, there's a lot more to that story, obviously, than we're going to cover in this short webinar. And as Simona said, we'll post some links to some of the foundational work that Boundaryless and others have done around platform organizations, so we can explore some more. But returning to our context, I mean, even on that brief explanation, anyone who's familiar with education institutions might recognize that that's not the model that we currently use. Particularly that emphasis on, having micro enterprises that are customer facing, the degree of coordination that's required between them to bring successful things to market and deliver value. And of course, the ability to partner seamlessly with other micro enterprises or indeed with partners outside the organization is a very unusual thing. I mean, universities do some of these things already at some level, but one of the key differences, I think, that is explored in the white paper and will be evident from Simone's materials is the kind of entrepreneurial aspect that, effectively these micro enterprises, or whatever you'd like to call them, act as autonomous entrepreneurial units going off to do things in ways that deliver value to the customers. As the literature always says, getting paid by the customer is an important thing in platform organization models. So one of the key questions is, as I said, is where do you start? So we'll talk about a couple of examples later of large-scale transformations. And typically, this does require a considerable degree of not only kind of transformation of process and structure, but also cultural change to try and move from the siloed organization or the matrix organization into something that looks much more like a platform. And so one of the things we explore in the white paper that people talk about right now is about, if you're going to do this, where would you start, and what are some of the things you'd need to consider? I'll reshare my screen, Pete, so you've got some speaking notes. Pete.
Thanks, Peter. Awesome. So I'm going to be talking a bit about implementing platform models, and something I'm really excited about with this whole project and the white paper is the breadth of experience that the team has brought to it. So Peter, with his very long history and experience working in all facets of education, Simone and the team obviously in their work around business models. And I've also had a lot of experience working with agile product development and corporate innovation. And I feel like all of these things are really coming together in the story that we're telling about the platform university and this idea of how to get started. So, drawing on some of the principles from agile and innovation, we're always thinking about how can we start, how can we find areas where we can test with minimal risk. So, yeah, the white paper is an in-depth piece and a lot of thinking in there, but we didn't start there, and we certainly wouldn't want to stop there in terms of just leaving it in the theoretical. It's about how do we put it into the market and get into contact with customers. And there's several, variables that you need to balance when you're considering that. And one is that you really want to make sure that you've got that ability to learn by interacting with actual customers, whoever they are, the people that are going to be exchanging some kind of value for what you've got to offer. Because in the absence of that, you'll never really know whether what you're doing is resonating. I'm going to be talking more about RMIT Forward as we go. But in our case, given that we're appealing more to the private sector in terms of organizations and corporates being the initial target market that we're going for, it's been quite conducive to us being able to test the market, try different propositions and see what resonates, see what people are willing to pay for. So that's certainly something to aim for. And then more broadly, in terms of establishing and maintaining those conditions for agility and learning, you need the fast feedback loops. So, in a university context, if you are working with, accredited courses that are perhaps running on semester or yearly type cycles, then your learning loops are going to be quite long. So in terms of a starting place and somewhere there where you can learn quickly, seeking out a place where those learning loops can be shorter. You can try something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, try something different is something to aim for. And that's certainly something we're fortunate to have in the RMIT Forward context, again, because we're servicing that more corporate market and we're able to try different strategies on our own timeline rather than being bound by an academic calendar in our case. And another last point here on the idea of balancing some important variables. I think one is around limiting your blast radius in terms of if things go wrong, you don't necessarily want to be risking your core business. So we're fortunate in the area that we're working in at RMIT Forward. It's a relatively new proposition, and it's not right at the core of the university's academic offerings. So I think that is another thing to seek out is where can you start experimenting where there is a reasonable risk equation and that people aren't paralyzed by fear of failure. because you need to be able to try things, and you need to be able to be prepared that not every experiment is going to succeed. So in that sense, we're looking for parts of the university that have external market connections so that you can be directly in touch with your customers, whether they're corporates or a subset of students. We want to have entrepreneurial leadership, so leaders that understand risk, understand what it takes to invest in something before necessarily getting a return, and understanding that learning from experimentation and that failure is part of that process is really important. So there are some things that, some guidance, I guess, in terms of parts of the university to look for in terms of somewhere to start. And just to elaborate a bit more about RMIT Forward, which I would consider absolutely a pilot for this idea of the platform university that we're talking about. The way we started a couple of years ago was very much as what I described like a fractal network, in that it started with Peter being appointed as the director. And our origin story, I hope you don't mind me repeating it, Peter, but in terms of how it started, there was the option to take a more traditional structure, but he chose to take on a group of part-time portfolio workers who each brought their professional network to the table. And from there, the ecosystem has grown. So I think that's, when we think about an ecosystemic type arrangement, it's part of the fabric, is that everyone's willing and able to build that network out and bring their relationships to the table, and that's part of the investment. That's part of the value exchange. And then look for clear value propositions for all ecosystem participants. So that's including people perhaps within the micro enterprise, like myself, working as a development partner. We've got our industry fellows like Simone that we collaborate with, and then the consumers of our services. And I've got to mention that the motivations matrix, part of the platform design toolkit, has been a valuable tool for visualizing that and getting us thinking about that breadth of value exchange that exists in an ecosystemic type arrangement. We're not just talking about a one-way value exchange between organization to customer. There's a lot involved in Forward in terms of the relationships that we have, and in terms of scaling it up and proving out that value. It's really important to be thinking about those motivations and that value exchange all of the time. So moving on to talk about using insights from pilots to refine and expand on successful practices. I just want to share a couple of things that I've really noticed in my journey working with Forward that I think are useful things to share and to build on. And one is that building the fellow ecosystem, through the networks and relationships that I managed, it feels a lot more like community management than perhaps traditional hierarchical kind of management. So it's more about inspiring people, bringing people on the journey, looking for those points of mutual interest and synergy, and understanding what value people want to create in the world, and then enabling that. So there's no sort of command and control kind of way of working. It's much more about how can we collaborate to bring that to bear, and that has its challenges as well. Like, I really enjoy that way of interacting, but it can be challenging when everyone's busy, everyone has multiple things vying for their attention and resources. It's different to a regular business where you just hire someone and tell them what job to do. But that's something that we've been experimenting with along the way, and introducing different forums to bring people together, using different types of technology to engage with people, synchronously, asynchronously, but to really enable that network and ecosystem. It's a different way of working to a traditional organization. And another short anecdote to share of just something that we ran into and successfully navigated was around the legal framework to do with how we manage IP. Again, we're not talking about a traditional scenario where our resources, if you want to call it that, or the people we work with are contracted, fully paid employees of the university. Rather, it's a collaboration across the ecosystem. So, like in most organizations, the standard paper agreement, if you ask for it from the lawyers, is going to be very heavily weighted towards the interests of the parent organization, the university in this case, and there'll be a lot of controls put around ownership of IP. And we had to say, well, look, the way we're looking to collaborate with our fellows is looks very different to that. People will be bringing their IP to the table. We'll be taking that to the market together, and people need their option to retain ownership and income from their existing IP. So it's a far more complex and nuanced situation to perhaps what you might normally encounter. And we're able to work with the university lawyers to explain how we're wanting to work differently, and to introduce some clauses to allow that flexibility. Of course, it will depend on lots of variables as we enter the market, but at least we were able to evolve that standard agreement so that we could take something to our fellows that really represented the spirit of partnership and the ecosystemic way of working that we represent. And then just finally on the point of fostering a culture of continuous improvement, we really try to create a safe space for experimentation. So we're very transparent, both with our stakeholders within the university and all of our collaborators, of where we're at, that we're trying things, that we require everybody to participate in that experimentation, and try to build in the rapid feedback loops. So get that volume game of, it's not going to be a one-shot wonder. We're trying lots of different things and sharing what's working, sharing where things didn't work, and looking to build on those learnings, those successes and those setbacks, because that's going to be what makes us stronger in the end. So yeah, that's a little bit about how we're thinking about implementing the platform models. Hopefully that provides some ideas and inspiration for other organizations thinking about doing that. I'll hand back to Peter.
Right, great. Thank you, Pete. So let's move on and talk a bit about some of the challenges. Pete mentioned some of them, that, typically universities, along with many other large organizations, are pretty risk averse and are often resistant to the kind of structural changes that Simone talked about. That the diagrams that Simone showed don't look like diagrams, that you'd see in many organizations. And of course, that creates a great deal of resistance, and the structures themselves often don't permit the degree of change that one might like at the pace that one might like. And of course, there are some solutions to that. And as Pete mentioned, being transparent about what you're doing, and then sharing success stories about when it worked out and what the success was. And of course, engaging with lots of stakeholders. So at one level, the entire idea of Platform University really is an exercise in engaging with stakeholders to explain some of the new ideas, thoughts, models, and approaches that can be used in a traditional environment. And of course, like many other industries, universities and in higher education is not alone in this. There's a huge amount of regulation and a huge amount of governance structures that often inhibit transformation. Change is very slow for many organizations. We'll talk a little bit about some examples of where that change played out in a minute. But of course, we need to keep advocating for regulatory flexibility. And that's a continuous discussion in almost every country in the world around the higher education sector, like many industries, is about the interplay between participants in the market and the regulators, and then the beneficiaries, through products and services of those organizations. And I guess the other one is to try and develop some more agile governance models that, permit the degree of calculated risk management that's needed to create that kind of change. And then finally, as would be apparent if you're not a university expert, this might be apparent to you, but when you are, it becomes much more apparent that the current funding models are incredibly complex. So the ways that students are funded to do their study, the way that research is funded, the way that research is funded nationally and internationally is incredibly complicated. We reference in the paper the situation Brexit, which effectively withdrew many higher education institutions from the ability to access European funding. Saw how complex that process is and what has to happen when you create change. And I guess one of the proof points here is to, in the platform university context, to implement these kind of platform organization models is to do a phased approach that demonstrates some return on investment. So again, sharing success stories and showing how this plays out for real rather than just a theoretical exercise is incredibly important. And we review a bunch of the inhibitors and opportunities in the white paper, and we'll do so in the future sessions that we have and the future things that we talk about. So what are those success stories? Well, certainly people who understand platform organizations will be well aware. Simone referenced one of them already, Hire, but of course, some others you may not be familiar with. Buurtzorg, which is a healthcare company in the Netherlands, which is an incredible success story, and you can read about that in a number of places. But it uses a decentralized model, not only to be more productive, but to deliver better patient care, which of course was the aim behind the Buurtzorg model. And Buurtzorg is a really interesting example of how that's played out at scale for an industry which is incredibly regulated and has high stakes outcomes, especially for patients who receive care from healthcare systems. There's a really interesting story behind Buurtzorg, and I'd recommend that if you want a place to start to learn about how some of this plays out for real, is to look at Buurtzorg. The other one is Bayer, the multinational pharmaceutical, which has implemented this thing called dynamic shared ownership, or DSO. This is a live thing that's happening right now. This is a thing that's in process, and it's an incredibly large-scale transformation of what is an old and very silo and traditionally structured organization that has, as of current count, 170 teams and 4,000 people working in this highly autonomous, flexible manner to reduce bureaucracy, which they recognize themselves as a problem. We reference in the report the quote from the CEO that says every large company has an organization problem. So it's about how you effectively respond to market demands by restructuring yourself. And their aim is to become more responsive and customer-centric and deliver more value. But I guess the ground zero that Simone talked about and who's collaborated with is Hire, which is the canonical example of combining these self-managing micro enterprises to foster this highly entrepreneurial culture. And it's this idea of everyone's paid by the customer. So the people delivering value, products and services to customers are in much more direct contact with them and understand their needs better than a traditional company. So that really, truly is an ecosystem. So here is the place to go and learn about, as Simone said, and is in some of Boundaryless's materials about how this plays out in real life for what is a hugely successful global company delivering an incredible range of products and services to the market. So if you want to go and look further, you can read the white paper, but also go and we reference these cases, but also go and take a look at some of the original articles and materials from Buurtzorg and Bayer and Hire talking about how this platform organization model plays out in real life. So what's next for us? So the platform, we're at the start of this journey, and to Pete's point, this is an experiment at all kinds of levels in trying to understand how we develop new forward-thinking ideas around skills and workforce transformation, how we bring that to life, and what we do next. So the first thing to do is download the white paper. Again, we'll post some details in the post-event write-up and on Simone's newsletter, and then join us for some more discussions. So we're planning to have a discussion on the 18th of November about higher education specifically. So we've only really touched on the kind of context of higher education. It's incredibly complex. It's there are millions of people, of course, studying at universities around the world, and each university system in each country has got a slightly different way of organizing itself. And so we want to talk a bit about what's going to be happening in higher education. Some of the drivers that we talked about are playing out now in countries around the world. So we're going to be joined by colleagues who are going to talk to us a bit about what that looks like for higher education in the next few years and how platform organization models might play into that. And then on the 9th of December, before year end, we're going to talk a bit about some concrete examples of what it means. Pete touched on them about small scale pilots and experiments, but talk a bit about what it means to bring this to life. What are some of the real challenges and what are some of the opportunities that platform organizations offer? And then, of course, you can come and talk to us about first coming to talk to you if you're a university or other higher education provider, coming to talk to you a bit about how these models play out and what some of the resources are that you can use and how we can help you try and bring that to life. And you can talk to any of us, of course. So Pete Coyne, email addresses are here, myself and Simone Cicero from Boundaryless. So I think we're pretty much done. Unless there are any questions that we have, Shruti, that we can answer right now, we'll probably wrap.
I mean, firstly, thank you. Thank you so much, Pete, Peter, and Simone, for taking us through the notes and introducing us to the Platform University initiative as well. I'm, personally excited to see how all of this unravels and platform organizations and entrepreneurial organizations take the center stage at universities. Yeah, before we close, maybe I could take up one or two questions. So, the first is, if there are universities that are hesitant to embrace such a radical transformation, right? Do you have any inputs or, suggestions or advice to them for them to take up such a radical initiative? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of them is, as we talked about, is doing small scale pilots and experiments. So in the same way that we're a small scale pilot and experiment, that has its advantages and disadvantages. If it's small scale, it's likely to be smaller impact, but with the right stakeholder engagement, it's possible to see some of the benefits of these models playing out. Of course, universities have got complex things to do. They're highly complex organizations. They have to maintain academic freedom, they have to maintain research integrity, but they've also got to do this agility thing with the need to diversify funding streams, especially in the current uncertain climate. There are other missions that universities have to fulfill alongside the traditional missions that they have as, incredible contributors to local and global economies and employers of skilled people and delivering life-changing experiences for students. So one of the ways forward is to try and engage in these small-scale pilots and experiments and communicate about them widely with stakeholders both inside and outside the university.
And one more question is, I know it can somewhat come off as overwhelming. So, are there any, let's say, small wins that universities can do to begin this journey as well?
Yeah. So Pete's example of Forward, which is our small organization in which RMIT University is an enormous university with 10,000 staff and 100,000 students and campuses all over the world, including relationships across Southeast Asia and with a campus in Europe, and relationships with all kinds of stakeholders delivering global research and innovation projects. So we're a very small part of a very, very big organization. But I guess one of the things that's really interesting is to try and read a bit more about. So the white paper is written for an audience that understands higher education. It's not written for people who are experts, but for people who understand it. But it's also written for people who are new, maybe, to the idea of platform organizations. And then we try to connect the two up in ways that make sense. Now, as we recognize in the white paper, widespread change overnight is highly unlikely, as it is in any other area of the world. Things take a long time to change, but it has to start somewhere. So there's a quote in the white paper from a commentator called Brian Rosenberg saying that he recognizes that things are hard, and indeed change is hard at all levels. But his quote is, "Hard, however, does not mean impossible, and doing hard things should be something that those truly committed to the value and power of education should embrace." So I think it's about facing up to some of the difficulties of this and trying to figure out what the early wins might be by embracing some of these models at whichever bit of a higher education institution you talk about or at whatever scale.
Thank you. I mean, I think that perfectly sums it up for us. Once again, thank you, all of you, for joining. Thank you for all our listeners. Please do make sure that you join in for the next set of webinars as well. As Peter mentioned, we have two upcoming, one on the 18th of November, one on the 9th of December, on higher education and how to bring platform universities to life, essentially. So the entire webinar today with its keynotes will be available on Boundaryless's website, and you can also find all the other details on our social media platforms as well. In case you have any questions or comments, you can always reach out to us. I think Peter shared some of the email addresses as well. You can also reach out to us on our media platforms. We hope to see you there in the upcoming webinars, exploring and reimagining the future of higher education with us. And thank you once again for joining. We hope that you have gained from your time with us. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.